Innovation doesn't just happen. It starts with a bold idea and drive to make it real. And today's guest had one of those ideas. What if you could bring restaurant check-ins, CGM data, and insulin pump data into a single unified view? Now, this was 2012 at a time when our diabetes technology didn't have a unified platform. And it wasn't yet fully understood how pumps and CGMs could work together to automate insulin delivery. His vision sparked a journey through the diabetes tech world that would eventually help reshape it. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and research with industry leaders, HCPs, and people living with diabetes. Today, I'm joined with Brandon Arbiter, a fellow T1D, the 19th person ever to use an automated insulin delivery system, and the co-founder and acting CEO of Tidepool. Back in the days before cloud-based data sharing, Brandon set out to fix one of the biggest problems in diabetes management: the inability to see your pump and CGM data side by side. That idea would later become Tidepool. And alongside that platform, the open source community would launch automated insulin systems like OpenAPS and then DIY Loop. Today, I talked to Brandon about how a fascination with location data via Foursquare led him to stumble into the diabetes tech industry. And we discussed the pivotal people he met along the way who helped bring Tidepool and open source AID to life. Plus, we dive into the launch of the recently released Twist pump, how Tidepool got its loop algorithm FDA cleared, and how Brandon sees a shift in diabetes care to be a more proactive and provider-supported model. Quick announcement, diabetic.info has a completely new look, a rebrand, and we've got a ton of great stuff coming. We did just put out a short interview with actor and comedian Anthony Anderson, who I got to talk to at ADA. There's also more content coming to our all access members, including a piece that just came out on the Beta Bionics tubeless pump called Mint and how I see that's going to impact the industry. Stay up to date on all of that, plus just any content we have coming out. Make sure you are subscribed to our newsletter. There's a link to that down in the show notes. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this show is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. All right, let's get into it. Brandon, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Justin. It is so great to be here.
So we officially really got to know each other at this year's ADA. We met briefly last year, but I always hear your name thrown around, and it was so nice to finally actually meet you.
But you were doing panel after panel at ADA. I think you were the busiest guy there. And I was walking through a hallway, and there you were. And I just had to stop by and say, "You're doing a great job moderating panels, and thank you for all of your work."
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I said to you, I was like, who are you? I need to know everything about how you fit in all of this, which is what inspired you to come on the show. Because I see you in the emails for Tidepool also. I'm like, I need to know how you got here because everyone has such an interesting story here.
I agree. It's amazing to hear the different stories of everybody who's contributing to the diabetes community. Everyone's got an amazing story, and I've got one. It's a small part of a big story.
Yeah, I mean, your story starts similar to mine in the sense that you were also misdiagnosed, right?
That's right. I was living in New York City. I was 27 years old, got diabetes, went to my primary care doc, and he diagnosed me with type 2. And I was in for a rough 6 months. I mean, 6 months with no insulin when I should have been on insulin.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen to me. I was misdiagnosed for 6 months also. Yeah, and it wasn't until people on TikTok told me that I had type 1 that I was like, oh, okay, cool, good to know. How did you find out that you had type 1?
My numbers were steadily increasing. I was taking the drugs that the doc had me on, metformin, Janumet. My numbers were just steadily increasing week after week. I'm poking my finger. And I grew an intense fear of food. I knew that food is doing this to
Yeah,
me. I got to a point where I just had this understanding that I have type 2 diabetes. The treatment is not working, and I probably only have a few months to live. So that was my mindset. Meanwhile, I'm withering away. I mean, I was down to probably 147 pounds when I was
Wow.
ultimately diagnosed. I think that's a BMI well below 20. And I'm going to the follow-up appointments with the primary care doc, and he said, I don't know what's going on here, Brandon. You don't have type 2 diabetes. You've got some weird kind of diabetes, and you need to see a specialist.
Some weird kind of
So,
diabetes.
so very kind. Yeah, so I called the folks at the Naomi Berry Diabetes Center in New York City. They're affiliated with Columbia, which is where I went to college. And I told them I was diagnosed with type 2. The doc's now telling me I have some weird kind of diabetes. I'm freaking out here. I think I'm going to die soon. I don't know what to do. I need to get in and see somebody. I'm an alumni. Can you please help me? And they transferred the phone over to Dr. Robin Golan, who's the director of the Naomi Berry Center. And she asked me four questions. I said, how old are you? 27. What's your diet like? I'm vegetarian. Do you exercise? Yeah, I like to run 5, 6, 7 miles a day. Um, and she said, how much do you weigh? I said, 147 pounds. She said, you don't have type 2, you have type 1 diabetes. I need you in my office tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. This weekend is Christmas. I don't care if you celebrate it or not. This is the weekend you're going to end up in the hospital. Be here tomorrow morning at
Wow.
8 a.m. And I got in next day, 8 a.m., met the doctor, met the diabetes educator. Doctor gave me the right diagnosis and said, you have type 1 diabetes. I'm going to do tests to confirm that, but I guarantee you have it. I don't need to do the test, but we're going to do it anyway. You need to be on insulin. Here, let me introduce you to your diabetes educator who'll get you set. That was it.
Yeah. And didn't the WNYC public radio, they like reported on this in some way? They
They
created a comic
did.
strip.
They did. So WNYC is like the NPR branch in New York City, and they called me maybe a year and a half later, and I don't remember how they got my name or story, but they sent someone to Oakland. I was then living at Oakland. This was at the time we were starting Tidepool. Actually, I was living in San Francisco, but they met me in Oakland, and they interviewed me, and I thought maybe they were going to write an article or something. And a few days later, I get a phone call from a friend saying, hey, man, I just saw this comic strip about you on the WNYC website. I had no idea what he was talking about, but then they turned the whole thing into a comic strip, and it's still on the internet. And it's pretty comical.
Yeah, I'll throw that link in the show notes so people can go check it out and get an even deeper look into your story. And then they go beyond your story and they start talking like politics and drug prices and stuff like that. It's pretty cool.
They do. Yeah, they used it as a jumping off point for a portfolio of journalism they were doing called Sugarland, where they were exploring lots of things having to do with diabetes, including misdiagnosis. And one thing that I really appreciate is, and Justin, I'm sure you've seen this too, the community has really gotten together behind the misdiagnosis of adults
Yeah.
over the last few years. And we're trying to create awareness. At a Beyond Type 1 event at ADA, there was a whole session about misdiagnosis of type 1 in adults, being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And it's a scary thing. People live in a lot of fear for many months before they finally get the appropriate diagnosis.
Yeah, and it's dangerous. Like if it goes untreated for long enough, it can be fatal. So,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it feels once you get the diagnosis, once you're in this world, it feels so obvious. Like the fact that so many physicians out there still don't know this. It's just so important that we, keep spreading the word, not only within our community, but more so importantly, like outside our community to just everyone scream it, right?
100%. Primary care docs who are treating adults need to understand that type 1 diabetes is not just something diagnosed in children. Like, I think that is
Yeah.
just the misperception that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. So I want everyone listening to understand a bit about your background because it helps us understand where you are today. And let's start kind of with your job at Fresh Direct. You were there. Were you there before your diagnosis?
That was
Okay.
my first real job out of college. I was there from 2006 to 2013. So I did a few things there. I started in the finance department, and we called it the Department of Finance and Information. And my colleagues kind of ran finance, and I ran information. And at a company like Fresh Direct, and I'll give background for the audience here who might not be familiar. Fresh Direct is an online grocer. Back in 2006 through 2015, it was kind of the premier online grocer in the United States. It was the first one to really do it well, do it profitably. uh, they leveraged the fact that everything was online to have one central warehouse with all the food, so we could actually get food fresher to customers. Whereas, if you're shopping at Whole Foods, first it goes to a distributor and then it goes to the store. So we could kind of cut that out and people getting fresher food. But to execute on that, you've got a couple thousand people working in the warehouse. You've got 150 trucks driving around New York City. You've got 700 people driving the trucks. There are so many different places, so many different parts of the supply chain that we were managing, that we were doing. And we had to do it all cheaper and with better quality than what you could get at a real grocery store. So you would trust us. An example of what I did is eggs would break, right? You're delivering thousands of eggs every day to thousands of people, and people would call in and complain and say, hey, my eggs are broken. So, how do we figure out how the eggs broke? Did they break in the warehouse? Is it because the person, put them in the box kind of in a rough way? Is it the driver? Is it actually the packaging that the eggs are in? Some are in styrofoam packaging, some are in pulp packaging. And we needed to be able to tie all of that data together. And so that was my job. How do we tie all of that data from all of those different systems together into one system so we could view the entire supply chain just for one dozen eggs, and then roll that up over all the eggs and understand the trends and patterns?
Yeah, and then you figured out why the eggs were broken, right?
Yeah, it wasn't me personally,
No,
but
what was it?
we
Tell everyone.
so there there were two major contributors. One was what kind of packaging did they come to us in, but the other, somebody had the insight of, why don't we, before we put the eggs in the customer box, why don't we open them and see if they're
Yeah.
broken? And it turns out we did that, and then that was where a majority of the broken eggs were coming from. And by being able to monitor the data, we tested that. We put aside the broken eggs that were broken before they got even into the customer box and left the building, and all of a sudden, customer broken egg complaints just dropped down to a very
Nice.
small number.
How would you say your work at Fresh Direct made you think differently about the diabetes technology or tools at the time?
Yeah, I think this is the fundamental question that drove the next 15 years of my life. So I'm diagnosed in 2011. I get put on an insulin pump, 2012, put on a CGM, probably also in 2012. And now I've got these two devices that are each generating 300,000 data points a year, a Medtronic insulin pump and a Dexcom CGM. At the time, there is no software in the world that will show you data from these two devices on one screen. And as a data person, somebody who, I lived my whole professional career was empowering people across an enterprise to make data-driven decisions. Now I've got all this data and there's nothing I can do with it. And I scoured the internet. I was looking for software to use. Now, Diasend existed, but you couldn't see data from these two devices. My Sugar existed, beautiful app, but it was mostly manual entry. It wasn't connected to any devices. So I'm thinking to myself, like, we've got to be able to get data from the devices into an app. And I can't believe it doesn't work. Now, so this is my idea. Let's get the data into an app. As you'll hear a lot of entrepreneurs say, having an idea is a dime a dozen. Everyone has ideas. It's all about execution. And I did not want to execute this. I didn't want to do it. I really liked my job. I liked my job. I liked my career path. But I started working on it anyway because I needed it to exist for me. And as I was doing that, I started asking myself, am I the right person? Like, can someone do this better than me? Like with my career training in information systems and working at a grocery store in food categorization, I was very disappointed to realize that I'm probably a really good candidate to do this. And that kind of took over a lot of my time, and I was going to a coffee shop from 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. before work, and then again after work, and just working on things, building apps, building dashboards to try to solve my diabetes and then see if that was in any way scalable.
Yeah, there's nothing better than a side project that you work on like early morning, late nights. That's the best way to kind of work in around what your main thing is during the day. I've been rebranding my website, and I'm like, this is going to take so much time. So I spend like a couple hours in the morning, a couple hours in the late evening, and it's more of like a fun thing. And it's out finally, which is exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really excited about it. Go to diabetic.info to check it out. But more about you, because that's why we're here. And I know that Foursquare had a heavy influence here too, right? So for people who don't know what Foursquare was, kind of or people who do, remind us what that was at the time.
Sure. Well, keep in mind the timeline here. We're in 2012. And the iPhone came out in, I think, 2007. Geolocation on your iPhone came out maybe a year or two later. And then this app called Foursquare came out that would use geolocation in your iPhone to track where you were going. And you could check in. It was like a gamified approach to life. And living in New York City was hugely popular in New York. Not just because, you're 20 years old in New York City, you're going to all these places, other friends are going. You can actually see like where the bars and restaurants your friends are checking in on Foursquare. They might be a block away from you, and now you can go over and visit and say hi. It was so much fun. And, Silicon Valley existed, but Silicon Alley, which is what they now call the New York tech scene, didn't exist yet.
Oh,
Foursquare was the first major like tech startup to be based in New York. So it kind of had this whole like people in New York loved it, were using it, and the startup was based in New York. And I was obsessed. And I'd check in everywhere that I went. And the software that I ultimately built, with help from a couple friends, it took the my check-ins from Foursquare using their API, and then the data from my Medtronic pump and the data from my Dexcom CGM, and we pulled it all together into one database and then put an interface on it. And then I'd go to a restaurant and it would tell me the last time you were at this restaurant based on my Foursquare check-in. Here's what you carb counted, here's how much you bolused, and here's what happened to your glucose. And it showed me the whole glucose trend. And I went around New York, instead of just checking into restaurants for Foursquare, I was like solving the meal boluses and getting better and better glucose results. And I'm like, oh my God, this works. This totally works. So that was how Foursquare, yeah, influenced the whole process.
that's amazing. How were you pulling in that data from Dexcom and Medtronic at that time? Because this is a time before follow and share existed. This is 2012. I think this may even be before Night Scout, right? Which is a big
Yeah,
contributor to pulling in multiple data points like Tidepool.
this this was before Night Scout, certainly before Dexcom Share Follow. So with a Dexcom, you could upload it to their proprietary Windows-based software, Dexcom Studio, and you can export an Excel file. And then with your Medtronic pump, you could upload it to their proprietary Windows-based software, CareLink, and export it to a CSV. Then you have to restructure all of that data and ingest it into your own database, which is what we did.
Wow.
So it,
That's
it was
awesome.
that was a
So
manual process.
fragmented. Yeah.
So
Okay. So
fragmented.
how often were you doing those exports of data and uploading and putting together?
A couple times a week.
Okay.
It would probably take 10 minutes,
Okay.
upload, export,
Yeah.
and then upload into my system.
Was this software just something like you were using, or were you able to share it out a bit at this point?
So starting with me using it, and then I was going to all these type 1 diabetes meetups through New York. I was trying to meet other people. Diagnosed at 27, I wasn't living at home with my family. I wasn't getting sent to diabetes camp. It was actually a very lonely experience. And I needed some community. I wanted some community. I was craving it. And I went to these type 1 diabetes meetups across New York. And I would show them at this point, I turned it into an iPhone app. and I would show it to them, and people were like, "Oh, I want that." And I got two people set up with it. So there were three of us using it. All of us loved it, but it was this kind of, you're like crawling through broken glass. You got to export your CSV and export your Excel. Like it wasn't scalable at that point, but it was good enough where I had some validation that I wasn't crazy, right? It wasn't just me. There were other people saying, no, 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 this is really good.
So you went to your diabetes educator with all of this information, right? Like, what was that conversation like?
So I had a mobile app that I would use for myself in restaurants, and then I had a desktop app that I built that kind of summarized the data and would let you just look meal by meal at my diabetes. So, today you go into your diabetes educator, your endo appointment, and they pull up the Tidepool screen or the Clarity screen, and you look at it, and you go day by day, or you look at the trends view. So my software went meal by meal. And instead of using Dexcom Studio back then and CareLink, we would use my software and look one meal at a time at how things were going, adjust my carb ratios, adjust my basal rates, and talk about bolusing strategies. And she was so supportive. Her name is Emily Coppage. Absolutely incredible people. It's um, when I say incredible people, the effect that diabetes educators have on people with diabetes, it's really world changing. They're in such a powerful role. And I think they touch so many of us. And sometimes they can be the unsung heroes of the diabetes community. But she was so encouraging. And yeah, she encouraged us to use my software to run each of my visits. And it was very empowering.
That's so cool. So I know a moment would be coming soon that was this serendipitous, pivotal experience. And it was at a wedding, right? You meet someone really key in connecting you to kind of the rest of your the rest of your life. So tell me about who you met at this wedding and kind of what sprung out of that.
So I was at a wedding in Los Angeles for my friends Aaron and Julie, and I was sitting next to Julie's sister Jamie at the wedding, and we were just chit-chatting, and she mentioned that she works at Medtronic Diabetes. It's like, oh my God. So I pull out my insulin pump. I'm like, look, I'm using your insulin pump. And she's, oh, that's great. And I said, do you want to see the software that I made using the data from this insulin pump? And she said, yeah. So I showed her the app. And she was like, so impressed. And I felt so good. Like, I'm talking to someone from Medtronic. This is incredible. And she said, would it be
Had
okay if
you
I go to
ever
work?
had you ever thought about like reaching out to someone at Medtronic or Dexcom at this point?
Um, no. At this point, I don't know that I had.
That's so
I
funny.
think I
Okay.
was I was still kind of tinkering.
Yeah.
And she said to me, would it be okay if I talk about this at work on Monday? And I said, yeah, tell anyone you want. And I didn't, it was like I didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. And then 2 weeks later, I get a call from Lane Desborough, who at the time was the chief engineer of Medtronic Diabetes. And he would go on to become, he's one of the creators of Night Scout. He was the founder of Bigfoot Biomedical, or co-founder of Bigfoot Biomedical. And I got this phone call from Lane, and he said, hey, I heard that you have solved for location intelligence and diabetes data. That's something I've been thinking about for a really long time. Can you tell me about what you're doing? And so I told him all about it. I showed him the app. I probably sent him some screenshots. And it was just an incredible experience because he was so into it. And talking to him, I felt like I'd really achieved something. It was like milestone unlocked. And this isn't just like somebody with diabetes, right? This is the chief of engineering of Medtronic who has a son with type 1 diabetes. I mean, this guy gets it. That was, I think, the moment that kicked everything off because then Lane said, hey, he's based in Los Angeles. I'm in New York City. He said, there's a few people in New York that I want you to meet. And so he sends in a follow-up email to me and these three guys. I didn't know who any of them were. I would soon find out. So it was Aaron Kowalski, the now CEO of Breakthrough T1D, David Panzier, trustee from the Helmsley Charitable Trust, and Brian Maslish, whose nickname is Bigfoot, and he went on to become the co-founder of Bigfoot Biomedical. And, these are three of the most impactful people in diabetes space. I've got no idea who I am, like who they are. I get this email from Lane, and like a week later, I'm out for beers with these three guys talking to about this app and what we can do if we bring data from multiple devices together into one ecosystem. And I think that that introduction was probably the beginning of the rest of my life.
So, did one of them ask you to be the keynote speaker at an event at that point?
So David introduced me to Dana Ball, then CEO of T1D Exchange. So then I got on the train and went up to Boston to meet Dana. And I met Dana, showed him the app, showed him the software, and he said to me, I knew data was going to be so powerful in managing type 1, but until this moment, I really didn't understand how that was going to happen. But now I get it. And uh, and this is awesome. He called me or emailed me 2 weeks later, and he said, "Listen, I was talking with David. We're putting on the inaugural T1D Exchange industry meeting, and we would love for you to keynote it." And I politely declined. I said, "No, thanks. I'm in the grocery industry. I'm not in the medical device space." And he said, "No, no, no. That's what makes it perfect. You're like a different industry, a fresh perspective. We need to
Yeah.
hear from you. We need to hear your story." And I'm a ham, so I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And I went up to Boston for this meeting and gave a little talk, and it was awesome. It was great.
This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. As someone with T1D and with an incredibly active lifestyle, it's important for me not to get tied up, especially with tubes on my insulin pump. I love to go swimming, lift weights, and play kickball with friends. And with Omnipod 5, I never have to worry about tubes getting in the way. Plus, not having to disconnect helps me to stay in range during all of my favorite physical activities. That includes sexy time too. See if you're eligible for a 10-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. That's omnipod.com/diabetic. How did you meet Howard Look, who you worked with on Tidepool?
Oh, that was fun. So one day, I talked about going out for beers with Aaron Kowalski. Aaron really took me under his wing, and he would check in on me, over the next few months. We'd meet up for beers. We went out for chili one day. Anyway, one day I get an email from Aaron introducing me to Howard. And the email said, "Brandon, I just had a call with Howard Look in Palo Alto. Howard's daughter was recently diagnosed with type 1. You two are both uh, yelling at me about the same thing. We need better access to data and diabetes. Why don't you guys talk, figure out the solution, and let me know what it is?" So set up time, talk to Howard, and we're like finishing each other's sentences. It was so incredible to be connected with somebody. He was a VP of software at Amazon at the time, and I shared with him what I wanted to do. He wanted to do, I wanted to take this app and make it big. He wanted to build an open source interoperable ecosystem where all of the different diabetes devices can flow into a database where it can then be available to third party developers. And I recognize that I can't build the app that I want to make if the thing that Howard is talking about doesn't exist. If there's no cloud to cloud connectivity, then there's no apps. And so we decided we're going to keep talking. And, I'm meeting people, he's meeting people, he's talking to folks at Stanford and UCSF on the West Coast. I'm meeting people on the East Coast. And we said, let's just keep each other posted. And so we did that. And then I think we were kind of doing some founder dating at the time. He invited me to come out and stay with his family in Palo Alto. And I'd never been to Palo Alto before. I grew up in Los Angeles. So I was interested in moving back to California. That was on my mind. I flew out. I spent a week with him and his family, and it felt like home. I can't explain it. Um, in the world of founder dating, to just feel so comfortable. And we would spend the days on his front porch with a huge, one of those huge notepads of white paper, and we're brainstorming and sketching and talking through ideas. And then as the months went by, we submitted the concept for Tidepool into a startup accelerator. And now this is middle of 2013. Y Combinator, startup accelerators, they're like all the rage. It's very exciting. And I was 20, 28, 29 at the time. And I'd wanted very much to do a startup accelerator. And now Tidepool got accepted into the Lean Launchpad health tech startup accelerator that was affiliated with UCSF in San Francisco. And that was it. I left my job at Fresh Direct and moved out to California.
Were was it on your thoughts at the time, like I could either do this myself in with Tidepool, or I could work in the industry at a company, say you have all these connections at Medtronic. Did you juggle that between like, do I want to go off and do this on my own, or should I go into a company like Medtronic and do it for them?
A little bit, and only a little bit. I at that point in my career, and maybe still to this day, though I haven't really had a cause to rethink this, I gravitate towards smaller startup environments. And I kind of gravitate away from large corporate environments. And I think that was very much part of it. So, I talked to some of the folks at Medtronic and other big companies, but I also got warnings from other people that were in the industry, like, hey, if you want to make a difference,
Hmm.
going there is probably not the way to do it.
It's slow. There's politics. There's a lot that comes with that. Whereas here, there's more autonomy. You're collaborating with these big notepads with Howard. I mean, that energy, I can only imagine, was just so intense and exciting and freeing in some ways.
It was very energizing. I mean, this
Yeah,
is, again, waking up at 6 a.m. to start work and working until
yeah,
midnight, 1 a.m. It very much felt like that romanticized startup life that
yeah.
like 3 years later became a hit HBO TV show in Silicon Valley.
Well, I
But
want to
it,
make.
it
I
did,
want
it
to.
felt like that.
Yeah, I want to make this whole story, the whole DIY story. I want to make it a documentary, like a 5-part series on HBO. Like that is a goal of mine. And interviews like this, and James Wedding, the founder of who's the on the foundation of Night Scout, and Pete Schwam, just everyone, right? I left out every single name, but there's just all these incredible stories behind it, and I love that I'm already documenting it, but I think that this could be such a nicely like condensed story. So one
There's so
day.
many, so many heroes in our space, and I agree with you. It's a story that needs to be documented and told.
Yeah, in a much more condensed, way rather than my 15 1-hour episodes. And
Yeah,
it will be.
Susanna Fox spoke at D-Date Exchange like 9 months ago in San Diego. I don't know if you were there for that
I
one,
wasn't
but
there.
so she has a book, um, Rebel Health. So Susanna
Oh,
Fox
I
has a
have
book,
that
Rebel Health.
in the other room right now, that book.
Yeah, and she features Tidepool in the book. She talks about it. She, in her story, and in her presentation, she talked about, and I did not appreciate this, diabetes and Justin, what you and I have been living through is this patient-led innovation. And the predecessor for us in diabetes is Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous was the original patient-led innovation. They were not getting the fidelity of care. People with alcoholism were not getting the fidelity of care they needed from their healthcare providers. And they created Alcoholics Anonymous. And it is, if you think about what AA is, it's very patient-led. And now you've got the type 1 diabetes community. And we've basically done a very analogous thing over the last 15 years where we were not getting what we needed from industry, from the regulators who, frankly, at the time, and this has changed, but at the time were um, had policies in place that were slowing things down. We were not getting what we needed from our healthcare providers. And so folks like Lane and James Wedding and Pete Schwam took it upon themselves and created something that actually provided us the fidelity of care that we needed.
It's interesting that you say that. It's almost making me realize that and people have told this to me, but like what I'm doing with all of my video content is putting out all of this crucially needed education on everything out there that people have options to, because many people's physicians or care teams are failing them with educating them on everything that's out there. And why? Because these physicians only have 20 minutes with this patient. They need to go to the next patient, right? So the ability for people to have easy access to all of this information, they could do all of this research, is so powerful and important. And of course, there were many people doing this before what I was doing, but me and all of these other people who are doing similar things are needed to empower all of these people.
100%. Just to put it simply, there's this jargon buzzword, you got to meet people where they are, right? And that's what you do. That's what you and your voice does. People are not in their doctor's office. What are we in there once a year, twice a year? And, the folks who are not up to speed on technology are actually going to their doctor's office a bit less often. And I hear this story from doctors. It's, when you look at the patients who are not on insulin pumps, they're coming into their doctor's office maybe once every year or two. Their glucose is not under good control. And by the time they finally get into an appointment, there's so much that they have to go through, that they have to talk about over the only 20 minutes that they have, that moving on to a different therapy technology or therapy paradigm, they don't have time for that. And what you do is you fill in those gaps and you meet people really where they are. It's like you're doing what all of us in industry are talking about.
Yeah, I have a lot of doctors that, message me, or when I see them at these conferences, they're like, after my appointment with my patient, I give them your Instagram. I say like, go watch them and watch all of their things on that pump that you're interested in. Like go learn about that with them. There really needs to be our system for any chronic illness or anything someone's dealing with, alcoholism. There needs to be this go-to source that doctors can give patients that are certified, these courses that people can watch and learn from. Like they should work with people like me to create these certified courses, whatever it is, because that will meet people where they are.
There's a need to democratize information, right? And I think one of the most impactful people in our space who did this was Katie DeSimone. She was, an early Loop community member. This was back in the days where it wasn't particularly straightforward to get up and running on the do-it-yourself technology Loop. And she documented the whole process. She turned it from you need to be a coder in order to implement it to if you can follow a recipe for a Sara Lee cake, you can do this yourself. And we saw the numbers. We watched the numbers of Loop users just go from being in the high hundreds to being in the many, many, many thousands after she did that. And that's the impact you can have democratizing information. So I really, I applaud the work that you're doing in getting this information out there.
Thank you. Yeah, and Katie DeSimone, she's done so much for this community. With loopdocs.org, it's made so many people able to easily start on DIY Loop. And that's kind of where we're getting with your story. So Tidepool, that's in the works. You and Howard are working on that. Is Ben West also working on Tidepool, or you meet him and are working with him on other things?
Ben was working on Tidepool.
Okay.
So, Howard was on the West Coast meeting people. I was on the East Coast meeting people. We're introducing each other to various people and starting to build out the team. Ben was actually the first person hired at Tidepool, even before Howard hired himself. He hired Ben. So, so they were working together. And when I moved to the Bay Area for this accelerator in September of 2013, you know, on a Google Hangout or something with Ben and with the team, and Ben said, I didn't even have a place to stay. Like I left my job and then uh, so I was giving a talk at a conference in Scotland. And then 3 days later, I was officiating a wedding in Colorado. And then 2 days after that, we were starting the accelerator. So I didn't have time to even think about where am I going to live. And Ben said, listen, you don't have a place to stay. I've got an extra bedroom in San Francisco. Why don't you come crash with me until you're settled? So I moved in with Ben into his extra bedroom, and so we were collaborating on Tidepool, and he had his other diabetes related projects that he was working on. But that's how I met Ben. We lived together for a year in San Francisco.
Gotcha. Now, tell me about the night that Ben West hacked his Medtronic pump
This was
or cracked it.
this this was a night that lives in infamy in my mind, and it's documented on YouTube actually. So we had we were both very Night Scout prolific. We had created what was called the Night Scout clock or the glucose clock, where you just have an iPad up on a wall and it would say what your blood sugar was and update every 5 minutes. And so we had those, around the apartment so we could see what our glucose was. Anyway, I'm in the bedroom, my bedroom, and I hear Ben yelling, Brandon, come out here. And so I like run out and what's going on? Is he have like in DKA or something? I don't know. And I run out. I'm like, Ben, you okay? What's going on? He said, put your pump on the table. So I take my pump out of my pocket and I put it on the table. This is like an old Medtronic pump. And he said, disconnect it, take it off your body. So I disconnected it. And he said, now watch your pump. And then he goes over to his computer and he starts typing on his keyboard. And I see a little circle show up on my pump. I'm like, man, what just happened? He looked at me and he said, dude, I just suspended your insulin. But he did that from his computer. And it was like, this was, I think, a pivotal moment for the diabetes community. Ben had established how to remotely communicate with an insulin pump from a computer. And in the weeks that followed, he figured out all of the different commands that you could send to a Medtronic pump. He wrote all of that code and put it on GitHub. Ben was and is a huge proponent of open source technology. So he took what he figured out, put it on GitHub, so now other people could see it too. Meanwhile, 8 months before this, Night Scout came out, right? Where someone had done the same thing with a Dexcom CGM. They had figured out how to connect a Dexcom CGM to an Android phone and send glucose data to the cloud. So now all of a sudden you have the ability to read data off of a Medtronic pump because of Ben's achievements, to send commands to a Medtronic pump, and because of Night Scout, you could get CGM data in real time. You have all of the pieces now for an automated insulin delivery system. This is 2014. There were no automated insulin delivery systems commercially available. It just wasn't a thing. But the pieces were now in place for people to do it at home.
Yeah, and there wouldn't be an FDA cleared system until what is it? Tandem's Control IQ may have been the first FDA cleared AID, which wouldn't be until 2021
I think
ish.
it
I
was
should know
Medtronic
this.
670. It was Medtronic
Okay,
670G. That was the first.
gotcha.
Now, that was
You're
powered
right.
by the older Medtronic CGM, which, objectively, if you just look at the accuracy ratings of that CGM, if you look at the user experience, like
Hmm.
it was not the more popular CGM at the time. So I think people were really hungry for an automated insulin dosing system that was powered by a Dexcom CGM.
Which would be that Tandem Control IQ that came next. Okay, so rewind back to where we were. You have all of these pieces to build this AID system, but it's pretty fragmented, right? You have one person working on this, one person working on this. These people may not even know each other yet. And then at this point, what is Ben like putting out this information that he's figuring out? He's just putting it out online for people to hear about, right? Like people hear about the project.
He's posting the code on GitHub. He's in the Night Scout community. There's a Facebook group called CGM in the Cloud. So Ben's talking about it there. And so the right people have visibility. They see what's happening.
And people with Night Scout at the time, and we talked about this in that episode with James Wedding, which people should absolutely listen to next. There's a rig people are using with their Dexcom receiver, right? So that is how people are getting their Night Scout numbers. Is this Dexcom receiver has a rig, it sends it to the cloud. You have that. You have Ben with his cracked Medtronic. These two things exist. Then you get an email from someone, right? Tell me about that.
So, Ben, um, ultimately, I found my own apartment, and I gave Ben his apartment back. And Ben and I were in close touch, and he told me, like, I've got it up and running. This works. I've been collaborating with Scott Laybrand and Dana Lewis. They have an algorithm. We put it all together, and we built OpenAPS. He told me that. And it's hard to distinguish sometimes with people on the forefront like Ben what is theoretical from what is practical. So he had told me, like, they built it. They built the open artificial pancreas system. And I said, that's amazing, Ben. That's so great. Are you using it? I think he wasn't even using it. I think maybe a couple other people were using it, but I didn't get to like see it for myself. And then it must have been September, October of 2015 at this point, I get a customer support email at Tidepool. Now, meanwhile, Tidepool had become the first software tool where you could upload a Medtronic pump and a Dexcom CGM and see the data together in one place at one time. So we've done that. And at Tidepool, we're adding other devices. So, we supported the Animus pump and the Omnipod pump and the Tandem pump and the Medtronic CGM. So now we had an interoperable data display system. And I got a customer support ticket from someone saying, hey, there's a bug in how basal rates are being rendered on my Tidepool screen. And he sent me a screenshot. And his basal rates are changing every 5 minutes. And I'm thinking to myself, what system is this guy using? There's no system out there that changes basal rates every 5 minutes. So I emailed him exactly that. What system are you using? Looks like your basal rates are changing every 5 minutes. Like, yeah, we had not coded Tidepool to support that use case, I guess. Um, and he said, oh, I'm using OpenAPS. And my mind is just blown, right? I'm getting an email from some random person claiming to use OpenAPS that 3 weeks ago Ben had said, like, we got it, it's up and running. And now I'm looking at the data in
is
Tidepool.
is Ben using it?
Uh, I don't know. I don't think so. I
Okay.
don't think so. But so I'm looking at this OpenAPS data and I'm like, I can see this guy's glucose and it's good. And I can see that anytime his glucose rises, the system starts delivering him more insulin and it brings the glucose down. And so like my mind is blown. I email him back and I said, hey, where where do you live? I'm kind of hoping that maybe he lives around the Bay Area if he knows Ben. And he said he lives in Oakland. This is maybe he lives in Berkeley at the time. This is Chris Hanneman. And uh, and I said, can we meet up for a beer? And 2 or 3 days later, I go out to the East Bay, meet Chris for a beer, and he shows me the OpenAPS rig where you've got a Raspberry Pi computer connected to this kind of big battery, connected to a Dexcom G4 receiver, and wired into a Medtronic CareLink stick. And you bundle these things together and you put them in a little camera bag and you zip it up. And that's your rig. You throw that in your backpack and it automates your insulin delivery. The algorithm lives on this little computer, pulls the data off your Dexcom receiver, and it uses that little CareLink dongle to issue commands every 5 minutes to your Medtronic insulin pump. And it worked. And I said, Chris, will you keynote the upcoming D data exchange, which is in a month or two? And he accepted the invitation. I'm thinking to myself, so at D data exchange, the FDA is in the room. Executives from every device company are in the room. And we're going to put Chris on stage. And like, listen, they've heard from me before. They've heard from Ben West before. They don't need to hear from us again. I wanted to recreate the experience that I had when I got the email from Chris. Someone who did not have a name in the diabetes community, just a real person living with type 1, saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm using this system." That was like, it was a shock and awe moment for me because it speaks to accessibility. Like, this isn't just one of us that you've seen on stage before. Everyone's going to be doing this. And Chris gave an amazing talk at D-Day at Exchange. And I think he floored the entire industry.
You kind of repeated history because you were that keynote speaker years prior. Someone invited you to be that person from the outside to show a new perspective, and you kind of returned that favor or recreated that, maybe even more impactful because this was just so revolutionary. What was the energy like in that room after that speech?
I think everybody's jaws were just on the ground. Like, this thing. So 6 months earlier, Scott and Dana had given a presentation at D-Day at Exchange, and they said, "We're going to do it." They said, "We are committing to
Mm,
you right now. We're going to do it." But again, there's like, there's a huge valley of death between "we're going to do it" and "it is done." Right? So that was like, there was enthusiasm. It was exciting. It was like, yeah, the pieces are there, but it's just theoretically possible. To see it get done, um, it was a real wake up for everybody,
yeah.
for regulators, for industry, and for members of the DIY community.
Yeah. Now, shortly after, it's December 2015, and you start on Open APS. In fact, you're what, the 19th person on it, potentially 19th person in the world to be using an automated insulin delivery system that automates insulin based on CGM levels. Tell me about that night.
So, you know, I, I went home from that D data exchange where Chris gave his talk, and probably in November, and even I was blown away. Like, I knew what was coming, right? But I was so overwhelmed with emotion that I went home and I said to my then girlfriend, now wife, "I need to do something hard. I need to dedicate probably the next 4 weekends to see if I can build this for myself, because it's so powerful and it's life changing. I don't I don't know that I can do it though. So I need some patience and support from you so I can dedicate the next 4 weekends to seeing if I can build my own open APS rig." And I started that first weekend, and I actually got pretty far along. Now, again, this is like the days before Katie DeSimone had documented how to do it. And in fact, the folks who had created it, they kind of put little gotchas in there so that you really needed to be a developer in order to get it up and
Mm,
running, because they didn't want, we didn't know how liability was working. They didn't
yeah.
want the responsibility of, it coming back to them or people using it, a DIY system, who were really ill-equipped to use it. So I got pretty far, and then I just got stumped. I got a call from Ben. And again, this is in the day of the G4 receivers, which had this kind of like plunger thing, and they weren't very easy to put on. And Ben said, "Hey, man, I need to get a new G4 receiver on, or a new G4 sensor, and I need a little help." And I said, "Oh, what a coincidence. I'm trying to get OpenAPS up and running, and I need a little help. Why don't you come over? I'll stick a new G4 on you, and you can take a look at my code for OpenAPS." And so he comes over, and I give him a new Dexcom sensor, and we look at the computer, and he adds 3 lines of code, and that was it. We were up and running. It was like a weight just being lifted off of my shoulders. It was like I'd gotten to the promised land. That's what it was like. Moses is on the edge of the Sinai desert looking into the promised land. He doesn't get there, but like everyone else gets to go in. I felt like I had taken my first step into the promised land, and I was there. And I think that's apt. I think that's what it was. That's really what it was. And I've been living in the promised land ever since that moment in December 2015.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. So this promised land that you enter, this new system, OpenAPS, it's this revolutionary new thing. But then just a few months later, there's another new thing that everyone's using. You're on the old stuff.
Right. So, there's this community in the Bay Area, and I was really lucky to be in the Bay Area at this time. Ben is there, and obviously there's a lot of software developers there, and we would get together, like those of us with Type 1 who were in the software community and do an open APS. And so I coordinated a meetup in July in the Mission District of San Francisco, and put out invitations to the people that I knew, and they would, invite a few more people, and probably 20 or 30 people got together, sitting, in this tech space where we're doing this meetup, and my friend Mark Wilson, who also gave an incredible D-Day Exchange talk, one of the most moving talks I've ever seen in my life, and it's worth putting a link to his talk
Okay,
into
we'll
the show
do.
notes if we can find that. Um, Mark looks at me, I'm using OpenAPS, and I'm 7 months into OpenAPS, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling like I'm on top of the world. And he looks at me and he said, "You're still using OpenAPS?" And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? And he
We've
says,
moved on.
yeah, he's like, "Dude, you got to get on Loop." I'm like, "What's Loop?" And this other gentleman named Nate is sitting on the other side of me. I never met Nate before, and so I met Nate and we greeted each other. And Nate created an iPhone app called Loop, and he was working with a guy that he'd met over the internet named Pete in Minnesota, who created a little computer chip. Um, And Nate gave me this little computer chip. Mark took my phone, plugged it into his computer, my iPhone, and all of a sudden I've got an automated insulin dosing system called Loop running on my iPhone. I mean, it must have taken 5 minutes. And this whole rig that I've got with like the Dexcom receiver and the battery and the computer Raspberry Pi and the Carolyn dongle, it's all gone. Throw it all away. You don't need it anymore. Now you just carry on this little chip.
Exactly.
CGM, I guess at the time the CGM could go to the cloud.
Or
Yeah,
no,
maybe this.
did it not connect to the phone directly or the little Riley link? One of the two?
Yeah,
No,
that's what it was.
the
The phone,
phone.
the CGM. You're right. The CGM was connecting to the phone directly, and that was new, right? That was new tech
Yeah.
from Dexcom, and the phone could now communicate to your insulin pump with Bluetooth using this little computer chip that Pete had created. And it was small enough to fit in a Tic Tac box. And so I went out and bought a pack of Tic Tacs and dumped them out and stuck it in. And I would now carry around this computer chip in a Tic Tac box, and that was in my pocket for the next couple of years. But that moment at that meetup, I'm 7 months into OpenAPS, and now I'm using this thing called Loop. And I could take this entire camera bag full of equipment and just dump it, right? I don't really
Yeah.
use that anymore. Now I've got a Tic Tac box in my iPhone.
Yeah, and later on, which I've documented through other conversations, I'll actually post in the show notes like all of the related conversations I've had in the DIY space, the loop space. Pete Schwam came on the show, so I'll put that all in the show notes so people can kind of learn all of this. Now, that device, that chip you were using, known as a Riley link, I would go on to use that myself in 2021. It became this like cute little orange AirPods case shape
Yeah.
device that you still needed to connect with the Omnipod, uh, Eros, which was later cracked at this point. It came soon after, or may have been working at this point that was cracked, and people were using either their old Medtronics or Omnipod. When was the idea sparked for Tidepool to say we want an FDA cleared version of Loop?
Right. So, it's important to distinguish. I have kind of two roles here, right? One is I'm a person living with diabetes, and I use the technologies that are out there that are the best fit for me in my life with diabetes, having nothing to do with Tidepool. Right? That's Brandon, part of the DIY or open source community. Then I also am part of Tidepool, a legitimate company that develops FDA regulated software, and we do it above board, above the table, in partnership with device companies, right? So these are two different parts of my life that I live. And so what we've been talking about so far is that first part, the DIY community. Brandon is a person with diabetes, and I need to take care of myself in the best way that I can. Now at Tidepool, we were at we had a company on site. We would do a retreat once or twice a year, bring everyone together in Santa Cruz. And at the time, there were probably 15 of us on the team. And we're looking around the table, and almost all of us either lived with type 1 or had a family member with type 1. Of that group of people, almost all of us were on Loop. And we realized, like, so here we're working on this retrospective data software that you can see data from all these different devices. And that's great. And people are using it. And it's awesome. But we're all sitting around the table kind of using something else. And so we had to ask ourselves, how can we as an organization make the biggest impact here? Now, at the same time, there are now over 1,000 people using Loop. So doctors are starting to see it. People are coming into doctor's appointments using Loop, and they don't know what to say. The doctors don't know what to say. Anecdotally, the people seem to be having better results on Loop than on any other form of therapy. So, in general, the doctors who are more cutting edge are comfortable with it and encouraging it, but there's no data. So, Dr. Jeremy Pettis out of UC San Diego gets on the phone with Aaron Kowalski at Breakthrough T1D and David Panzier at the Helmsley Trust. The way Aaron Kowalski is at this point also on the Loop app. I think David's family members are also using the Loop app. So everybody's in the know. We all see what's happening. The writing's on the wall, but there's no clinical data, right? And in the medical space, it's so critical to have clinical data to just show like the difference between an N of one story. Like, oh, I use this and it's great for me, but that's different than this is safe and effective for a broad group of people. So they start talking about pulling together a clinical study. And the Helmsley Trust decides they're going to fund a clinical study of up to 1,000 people using Loop. And the protocol gets written, and they're getting ready to start that study. They pull me in. Tidepool is going to be the data management platform for the study. And Evan and I are talking. I think we were the J. So Breakthrough T1D and Helmsley also put on an interoperability conference in Washington, D.C. It was diabetes interoperability. FDA was there. All the device companies were there. And Howard and I are, I don't know, walking to dinner or something. And he says, Brandon, I've got a crazy idea. What if we take the loop code, use the clinical study data from this study that Helmsley is about to fund, and bring Loop through the FDA? Develop legitimate partnerships with device companies and commercialize it.
When is this? What year is this?
This must have been early 2018. Yeah,
Okay, so this is
2018.
about a year and a half after you get on Loop.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
2017, 2018, right around there. And I said, this is a great idea. This is certainly worth having some conversations. We had the protocol for the clinical study. We knew what was going to come out of it. And, we didn't know if the data was going to be good, but we knew how it would be generated. So we scheduled a meeting with the then division chief of the diabetes group at FDA, Courtney Lias. And we asked her, if we do this and we take this real world evidence of 1,000 loopers for 6 months, which would be far more clinical study data than any other automated insulin dosing system had generated to date. Generally speaking, you're looking at 120 people for 3 months. We're talking about 1,000 people for 6 months. We said, would you accept this as pivotal study data? And she said, yeah, FDA loves real world evidence. We would definitely do that. She said, the results might be terrible and you won't get cleared, but in terms of the eligibility of the data to be considered, sure. So after that conversation, we went back to Breakthrough T1D in Helmsley and we pitched it to them. And they were very excited about it. Having this all started at an interoperability conference, and the FDA is talking about creating an ACE pump pathway. It's an insulin pump that is interoperable, an interoperable CGM, and an interoperable automated glycemic controller. Well, in order to get these things cleared, someone has to make it. So who is going to build the interoperable automated glycemic controller? And so what we said to Breakthrough T1D and Helmsley is we'll do it. And it's going to be Loop. And it's going to be truly interoperable. And everybody was enthusiastic about the idea. So we kicked off funding with Breakthrough T1D and Helmsley. We started working with industry to see if there were companies out there that'd be interested in doing this with us. And we got the go ahead from the FDA to pursue this approach. And that's how things kicked off.
How does it feel to now see, that gets cleared? And now you have the twist pump coming from Sequel MedTech that is officially launched now using that algorithm that you pushed, that you and Howard were like, let's just do this ourselves. How does it feel to see that on a system?
It's a dream come true. Again, it's a weight off my shoulders. I think off a lot of people's. The Loop app is such a great user experience. When you're using it in a do-it-yourself capacity, you're dependent on these potentially tenuous connections with diabetes devices. Like, is this connection going to work with the next generation or the next generation of device? But the Loop user experience and algorithm in and of itself deserves to stand alone and stand the test of time. So to see a partnership now with Sequel, where Loop is now out there in the wild, commercially supported, I think it's a huge weight off a lot of people's shoulders because a lot of people really love this app. There's also a lot of people who didn't have access to it before, realistically, because they're not going to build it themselves. A lot of people don't want to DIY their diabetes, right? They don't want to take responsibility for their automated insulin dosing system. That's a little scary. Now, with Sequel managing the commercialization, the deployment, the software, people don't have to do it themselves. You can have a real supported commercial system and have access to the Loop app. So it's really powerful.
Yeah. And thank you for all that you've done and all the hours, days, months, years of your life that you've spent making this happen, because I'm just so excited for everyone to have access to a system that, has been tried and true for so long. I think this is a really big moment in the diabetes landscape.
I agree. And to take a patient-led innovation, turn it into an FDA cleared commercial product, that's also, there's some
Has that
precedent
been
there.
done before? Yeah,
I don't
right?
think that's been done before. I think this is a very
No.
new thing. I think we did something that maybe has not been done before. Kudos to Howard for having the vision to do it. When we had the idea, when Howard had the idea, after he and I talked about it, actually the first phone calls he made were to Nate Raycleft, the original developer of Loop, to Pete Schwam and Katie DeSimone. We as Tidepool, we didn't want to do this alongside the DIY community. We wanted to do it together with the DIY community. So we called the three of them, and Howard did, and said, here's what we want to do. Are you supportive of it? We don't want to do it if you're not supportive. And to their credit, Pete, Nate, and Katie all said, yeah, that sounds awesome. Like the support burden in DIY is getting very intense. And there was a desire among the leadership to have a commercial version, but they weren't going to do it themselves. So they all supported it. And then Howard said, I would love for you to join the team and do it with us. At the time, Nate had just gotten a job at Apple and had handed off all of the loop responsibilities to Pete. And so Nate said, listen, I'm on the Apple Health team. I actually think I'm going to be more helpful for you here than if I joined Tidepool, but you've got my support. Katie and Pete both joined the Tidepool team, and they were instrumental to creating the FDA cleared version of Tidepool Loop.
Yeah, we've all seen Nate's work at Apple firsthand. You just open up the health app, and the fact that there is an option or setting that shows you how much insulin delivery has been sent on Apple Health and what your average glucose is and how it's changed. I get alerts on my Apple Health saying your average glucose went down 10 milligrams per deciliter. Find out why, or whatever it is. I mean, that's Nate. I don't think it's anyone else. Like, I think it's Nate. He's not going to say it's
Well,
him. He's, yeah.
I was going to say, I don't know what happens behind closed doors at Apple, but it is, there are a few members of the type 1 diabetes community that I know of who are working at Apple.
Okay.
And it's great to know that we have representation there.
Absolutely. Is Tidepool done? Like they got Tidepool Loop cleared and they're like, all right, that we did it. Like why is
No,
Tide no, right?
we're not done. I think at Tidepool, we feel like now that our partners at Sequel have launched the Twist system powered by Tidepool, at Tidepool, we feel like we're just getting started. Like now we have this solid foundation to really excel, and it feels like we're on a rocket ship right now. So, the version of the app that Sequel commercialized is based on our original FDA clearance, which was from 2023. And the version of the Loop app is from like, before that, 2020 or something. And there's been so much innovation pouring into the Loop app since then. Tidepool is now taking that innovation and pushing it into Tidepool Loop and working towards our next FDA submission, which might just bring the Tidepool Loop code up to speed with the DIY Loop code.
Gotcha. So would that be like the auto bolus features that Loop has today? Would that be in the next iteration of Tidepool Loop?
That could be a feature that gets
Okay.
in. At the end of the day, like we can't commit to what's in or out until it's like gone through FDA and it's
Yeah.
cleared. But that would certainly be something that we would look to have in. There's the presets feature that support various activity, menstrual cycles. That's a hugely popular feature in the DIY community. That's something that we'd be looking to pull in. And we're looking to do this on a pretty near-term timeline. All right, we're talking months, not years. So the Tidepool team is hard at work at that. I can talk about, we received a grant from the Helmsley Trust to uh, take data from this large exercise study called T1D that looked at how different types of exercise affected insulin and glucose. And we've analyzed those data sets and looked at, can we introduce pre-configured presets into Loop for common activities like walking or running or biking, so that not only, in the DIY Loop app, you can create your own presets, which is great. And I certainly hope we can take that through as well. But where do you get started? And we want to give people a starting point. So we got a grant from the Helmsley Trust to do the study. We published a few papers on it already. And that work, I would also hope, will make it into the next version of Tidepool Loop, which I would also hope then SQL can
Yeah.
take and incorporate it and update what they're delivering.
How difficult do you think it is for them to incorporate, just the next version of an FDA cleared algorithm? I feel like it could be somewhat seamless. Obviously, there's a lot of back end of education and all that, but
They move quickly. The folks at SQL and their partners at DECA, they're fast. It's been inspiring and humbling to work with them. They say they're going to do something, they say that they're going to do it quickly, and then they execute on that. So they're a really ideal partner for us to have.
What about the news that came out this week? There's an update with Libre sensors, right?
Yeah. So back to the Tidepool platform. Phase one of Tidepool platform was, let's create an interoperable experience where you can see data from any device together in one place at one time, regardless of what devices you choose to use. So we achieved that. But the next step is like getting cloud to cloud data, because this idea of taking a device and plugging it into your computer and uploading it, it's just such a barrier, right? And if we could do that all seamlessly, automatically, and continuously, and have data feeding from you and your devices into the cloud and to your medical care team, you get to a point where you can start to imagine a different kind of care paradigm. What do you and I do today? We go in and see our endocrinologist a couple times a year. Sometimes we go in and we're having a good week. And so they look at the data and they're, oh, you're having a good week. See ya. You need any more prescriptions? You ever hear that question? Do you need any more
Yeah.
prescriptions?
Yeah.
Um, and then 2 weeks later, you're having a terrible week. And they're like, this is when I need help. I need help now, but I don't have an appointment now. So the promise of cloud to cloud data sharing is we can create a paradigm of what I call proactive care, where the data is always flowing through to Tidepool. And then Tidepool has a dashboard, and this exists today. We have this dashboard. It's called TIDE. It stands for Timely Intervention for Diabetes Excellence. We have a dashboard that sorts all of the patients in any given clinic into different buckets of glycemic risk. Who's having too much hyperglycemia this week? Who's having too much hypoglycemia this week? And the clinic
Wow.
staff can take a quick glance at that dashboard. You don't have to stand in front of it all day, every day. You can go take a look at it Monday morning when you get into work, or you kind of, allocate a couple hours a week to look at it, go through it, and you can contact the patients who need help this week. And so it's a completely different care paradigm. And we've launched pilots with Stanford, with the Barbara Davis Center, with UC Davis, and the results are unbelievable. Stanford has demonstrated a 1.1% A1C improvement in the newly diagnosed people that they put in this in this care paradigm. A 9% improvement to time and range versus the patients who are not put into this care paradigm. So we see the results. It works. And we've been able to do this with Dexcom CGMs because Dexcom was a pioneer in enabling cloud to cloud technologies. This week, Tidepool launched cloud to cloud support for the Freestyle Libre portfolio of CGMs as well. So now any given clinic around the country can get all of their patients on CGM who are either on a Dexcom or a Libre into one unified dashboard that automatically, algorithmically sorts those patients into buckets of glycemic risk. And if you're having a good week, you might not hear from anybody. I don't know that I want to. We talk about like positive affirmation, and I think there's a lot more research that needs to go into like when do you reach out to people? But at least we now have visibility to who's struggling this week. And their clinicians, diabetes educators can reach out and say, hey, I see you're having a problem. Is there anything we can do to help?
No, I was just gonna say that's fascinating how you're able to pull all these people in different groups and care teams can reach out to people because currently I think myself included a lot of well I like my care team but I don't hear from them very often at all really unless I reach out to them. I'm close with my diabetes educator so that's something different but if you're struggling no one knows until that that 6 months every 6 months appointment right like
100%. And, one of my friends, Dr. Jen Sherritt at Yale, she's an amazing pediatric endocrinologist. And it was maybe 2 years ago now, she put this so pointedly for me. She said, I spend most of my time providing care for people who don't really need my attention. because it's the people who are already achieving A1Cs of 7.5 or better who are also the people who are writing in on my chart and saying like, hey, doc, can you take a look at my settings? Can you optimize this? Like, can you tweak this? I'm having a bad week. And then the people who need help the most, they're also the people who struggle to come in for appointments. Maybe it's a kid who's got a mom who, kid with type 1 who's got a mom working two jobs, single mom working two jobs. And getting into a doctor's appointment is just far more challenging. And so this is where flipping the care paradigm to proactive, to risk-based or challenge-based, like we can see who's struggling and we can reach out to them. And so I think it has the capacity to completely level the playing field. And we saw this at UC Davis in our pilot there, where they've got patients who have not gone on insulin pumps. And they went into this program, again, with connected CGMs. And whereas for the last several years, they come in for one appointment every year or two. And like I said before, when you're not in great glucose control and you're only coming in for an endo appointment every year or two, you've got so many other things to talk about. Maybe you've been in DKA, and maybe that's what brought you into an endo appointment a few weeks later. And so you got to talk about that. And they don't have time to talk about the new technology. But being in this proactive care program, they had 20 people in it on all different types of therapy. And three of the people on MDI in the program actually converted to being on an automated insulin delivery system during the program. It created this level of dialogue between the patient and the clinician that had never been there before. And now people are leveling up in terms of their care.
Now, how do you make this happen? You're working with all of these individual places on this trial run. How do you get all of these endocrinology offices around the country to be proactive?
So we built this in collaboration with Stanford Medicine. Their team is incredible. They're on the front lines. We've published papers with them about the technology, about Tide. Um, and David Maas leads that group. And he said this very succinctly. There are endos and clinics out there who are not satisfied with the results that they're getting. They know there is a better way, and now we have it. This is the better way. And we've now built the software. It is in Tidepool Plus. It is in the clinic version of Tidepool, and any diabetes clinic in the US can now get it. So they can call us and we can get them set up. Um, and David pointed out there are other diabetes clinics who might be satisfied with the results that they're getting today. And they don't have the desire to change their workflows. And this is, I think, an important point back to your question. How do you get clinics to adopt it? It's a different workflow, right? It is not the same paradigm of I'm going to see my patients when they come in for a visit, or I'm going to respond to their MyChart messages. So a medical assistant or a diabetes educator can have as part of their job to look at this dashboard. And then everyone can work at the top of their license, meaning the things that a diabetes educator is qualified to address, they can address it. The things that a medical assistant is qualified to address, they can address it. So I'll give you an example of that. Some of these kids or people will stop getting their CGM supplies because there's some conflict between their insurance company and the distribution company. And it results in like you and me not getting our CGMs. And I'm like, what are we going to do? I've been in this position. I'm a patient at Barbara Davis Center, and I was having this problem. And I'm going back and forth between my uh, insurance company and my distributor. And I can't get them to see eye to eye. One says it's approved, the other one says it's not approved. And here I am,
Mhm.
like, not getting new CGMs. While this is going on, I went into the Barbara Davis Center, not as a patient, but as a Tidepool representative to show them this new population health dashboard that we have. And they looked at it, and Dr. Todd Alonso, who runs the pediatric clinic, he looks at it and he says, Brandon, am I seeing this right? With this dashboard, if someone lost access to CGM, it looks like you are flagging those patients. And I said, yeah, that's part of the dashboard. If the CGM is connected, but there's no data coming through, they get flagged. And he said, this happens to us all the time where patients have a distributor and an insurance company fighting with each other, and we know how to resolve the fight, but the patient doesn't.
Yep.
And I said, Todd, Dr. Alonso, I'm having this right now. Like, I'm living this problem right now. I've been fighting with insurance for 2 weeks. You're telling me you guys can solve it? He said, send a my chart message to your endo right now and see how long it takes. And I kid you not, Justin, the next day I had CGMs at my front door. It didn't dawn on
It's
me to
amazing.
ask my care
Yeah.
provider to help. And now Todd's looking at the dashboard, Dr. Alonso's looking at the dashboard and realizing he can look at it, and a medical assistant, he doesn't need to pull time from a diabetes educator or a doctor. A medical assistant can
Yeah.
look at, and then we launched a pilot with them, and this happened weeks later. And a kid got CGMs who otherwise wasn't going to get them.
Yeah, that's great. And it's much needed because not everyone will advocate for themselves, or it'll just take so much time because we're busy people that we can only get to one task a day, and it may take a long time to get access to all of that stuff. I have gotten into the habit whenever I have any issue getting anything, I've already had the experiences of spending hours on the phone. I don't care how small it is. I message my provider. I'm like, hey, can you help with this? Can you help with this? Because the worst case, they'll be like, you can do that. You can do that yourself or whatever. But these things can sometimes take so long, or rather, they'd take me a long time. It won't take them a long time. So the ability for them to just be able to pinpoint and see that someone needs something and that person doesn't need to eventually get to it is so key. And you're kind of answering, like, I kind of wanted to move into what the future of diabetes treatment looks like. And I think this is what it needs to look like, is being proactive, getting to things much faster and quicker, and empowering healthcare facilities to have the knowledge and ease of making a lot of these decisions or taking care of a lot of these things for us, or in combination with us.
100%. The future, on the clinic side is proactive care. And with this launch, with our launch of the Freestyle Libre integration, cloud to cloud with Tidepool, now you can marry that together with Dexcom integration and see all of your patients. The technology is now there. And we're running this now at these kind of academic diabetes centers that I talked about. We're running this at independent endo offices, and we're in talks with some of the largest health systems in the country about implementing this. So that technology exists. If anyone is on this, listen to this podcast and is interested, reach out to me, Brandon at tidepool.org. You can reach out to the sales team, sales at tidepool.org. We can talk you through getting set up. On the patient side, on the at-home side, I think that AID systems are really just at the beginning. We have the opportunity to personalize how these algorithms work for individuals with diabetes, to be more custom tailored to your metabolism, to, what you eat, the way that you exercise. We have an opportunity to remove the need for meal announcements and still achieve time in range greater than 80%. We have the opportunity to be smarter about exercise and empowering people to exercise with better results. As a device community, these are the opportunities on the horizon that I think we need to actualize. And so, when we think about the future of diabetes care, I think of those opportunities. Really living in a world of Gen 1 algorithms right now, right? And
Absolutely. And when you think of something like Tidepool, which has been able to bring all of this data together, the next step of that is that data can be used to automatically tweak and adjust your algorithm minute by minute, learning how the exercise and the food affected you. And AI is such a buzzword, but it will unlock the ability to do this, because right now we wait until that appointment with our endo or our educator to do a slight tweak, when that could be done every day on its own without us even knowing it's being done. I mean, if a human can tweak it every day, then most certainly an algorithm, and in combination with machine learning, can do it too. That's where we're headed.
Absolutely. And you see the trajectory with self-driving cars, right?
Yeah, I rode in 5 of them the other day.
You're riding in a Waymo. Waymo's been around for a long time. They've been developing this technology for a long time. And only in the last year or two are you starting to see them on the road. And the technology has gotten good enough where, like, we can blast this out. And I think that, AID algorithms are where Waymos were 10 years ago. This is the beginning. This is the Gen 1. And we've got a huge opportunity to make them so much better and improve outcomes for so many more people, level the playing field, and really get people living their best lives.
I want to end with this. I have a lot of listeners who are building an app or working on their project for this space. What would be your advice to them? What have you learned through this process, all the way from early Fresh Direct days? What's something that you wish you had known, or something that can help them with their endeavors?
Think about data access, talk to the device companies, explore their APIs, see what information is available, get on their radar. A lot of these companies make data available just on a partner by partner basis rather than make it available to anyone. So, start having those conversations earlier, and and keep working. We need innovations. I was working on this app 15 years ago, 12 years ago, that was all about tracking food and improving my meal boluses. And then 2 years later, someone comes out with Open APS. Well, that completely disrupted what I was working on. That's way more impactful. Um, I think that level of disruption you can have. Like, you can create that level of disruption. And it changed the entire industry. And I think that that's going to continue to happen. It's going to be people with diabetes who have an idea and the ability to execute, even if it's just a prototype, get it out there, get people using it, and change the world.
Brandon, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. This may be my longest podcast episode ever, but it was worth every second of it. It was just fascinating. Your story is inspiring, and the work you're continuing to do is so exciting. And I just can't wait to see where it all goes, and how the industry and care facilities use it.
Justin, it's such an honor to be on. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. What an incredibly inspiring episode. Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. I had so much fun listening to you, and I've listened to this episode probably a couple more times because I just thought it was so cool. We have got a lot more episodes that kind of revolve around this theme and other people who have had an influence in that DIY space, or in the diabetes tech space. So we've got interviews with Pete Schwam, who worked closely on DIY Loop, Howard Look, the co-founder of Tidepool, James Wedding, the part of Night Scout Foundation, and Amy Tendrich, who had Diabetes Mind. She throws the D-Data events. So you've got all those episodes in the library. I'll throw those in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Justin, and I'll tech you later.